So the storyline at the South Carolina General Assembly last year was a battle between conservative lawmakers in the Freedom Caucus, a group of limited government, socially conservative, fiscally conservative lawmakers who are trying to turn the Republican-controlled legislature more in a direction that will benefit the people of South Carolina, not the special interests who seem to control the Republican establishment. We've talked to a number of folks on both sides of this debate, but today we're joined by a state lawmaker who's been one of the leaders in the Freedom Caucus, Representative April Cromer. April, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Obviously, you're friends with Representative Joe White, who's been on this show a couple times.
Yeah, he's great.
And you guys work very closely together in the Freedom Caucus over at the General Assembly.
We do. We've become great friends. We very like-minded on a lot of issues.
He's a good guy. You know, we were talking earlier. He's like the only politician that we've had on, and then we've had him back a year later, and I had nothing to grill him on because the guy literally did everything he said he was going to do.
You know, it's amazing. It shouldn't be lost in this area that should happen, but unfortunately, right. Integrity and accountability matter.
He mentioned last time he was in here when we spoke with him that you and he worked very closely on the Freedom Caucus agenda on a lot of the issues that are coming before the legislature. And I want to dive into a bunch of those. But before we do that, I wanted to give you a chance just to kind of introduce yourself to our audience, of folks who follow FITSNews.com. They know we covered your race when you ran for the House the first time. But give us just a little bit of background, who you are, where you're from, what you do.
Thank you for covering that race. Not a lot of people did initially, so I appreciate that. My name is April Cromer. I'm born and raised in Anderson, South Carolina. My husband's born and raised in Anderson and has a family business. Been working with them for over 20 years. The business was established in 1981, and over 119 employees. Could use, like everyone else, we could use more. Just depends on the day how many employees we have. Completely debt-free. Very proud of that. Not dependent on the government. And so when COVID hit, that was just one thing that kind of got my attention, brought me off the sidelines to get involved because of my love for Anderson County and the people there. We weren't being represented the way we needed to be. And so I felt like, hey, it's the time that I need to step up and do what I can. And I ran on just core Republican small government issues and limited government. Tried to be very truthful. I knocked on over 4,000 doors because I felt like it was important to know the needs of the people in the community because I was wanting to come to Columbia to represent them. And fast forward, here I am.
You knocked off a very influential, very veteran lawmaker, a former Ways and Means chairman. It was a big upset, and it was one of the upsets that I think really upset that establishment. You know, it was one of their own that you defeated in that election. Let me ask you this. You talked a little bit about COVID and going through that. What else compelled you to enter this crazy world of professional politics?
Well, I have a son and a daughter. My daughter, at the time, was an athlete, played volleyball, had several friends across the U.S. playing volleyball, worked really hard. I mean, very competitive. I had full ride scholarships, these girls, and saved the women's sports.
Yeah.
And they couldn't speak up. Their parents couldn't speak up because of afraid of losing their scholarships and the repercussions of that. Well, hey, this is South Carolina. My daughter and the girls here, we don't have anything to worry about. It took 3 years to pass that in South Carolina. And I think the first year it came up, I thought, oh, yeah, it's going to pass. It didn't. And I thought, well, it's, before the end of session. And it didn't. And I was just shocked, appalled, and embarrassed.
Let me ask you about that because we asked Representative White when he came in about difference of what he thought the process would be like coming into it and then after having been in it for a year. And I asked him, I remember saying, is it the same as you thought it would be, or is it worse? And he said it was worse. What's your take on the first year of being an elected official?
Well, I think coming from the business community, small business, where you have to make the decisions to make things work. And if it's not working, you make the immediate decision to fix it if you want to survive. And to have a supermajority in the House and to know that we have the ability to help the taxpayers in South Carolina and to see that they're hurting right now and that swift action is not being taken and taking advantage of the supermajority that we have. Instead, we're focusing more on the lobby, special interest groups. That was very shocking to me because I'll do whatever it takes. I'll stay there however long it takes. But let's pass stuff that's going to help the people.
You mentioned swift action, and I wanted to throw this example out to you. There's the $1.3 billion bailout for Scout Motors, a subsidiary of VW, a very woke, far left corporation, coming to South Carolina, coming to Blythewood. But that incentive package, $1.3 billion, it went from being introduced to being law in 12 days. That strikes me as pretty quick action, and yet the fight for tax relief, the fight for school choice, we keep hearing, well, we don't have time for that, or we don't have the political will for that. As you watch this process unfold, you've obviously got a behind-the-scenes view of it. Are these lawmakers just lying to the people about how the process works?
Yes, I think so. Because with your example, that could pass in 12 days. We have the power of the purse in the House. We have a supermajority. We have a conservative state, but we lack the will to do anything. And the passing the buck and they can do this or we can't do that, it's just a shell game of blame. I'd say they're lying.
Your colleagues stood up to some of those leaders early in the session. You were presented with a loyalty oath, I believe it's been called, whereby if you endorsed someone against an incumbent Republican, even if it's a friend or business associate, someone you've known your whole life, they threatened to kick you out of the caucus. And in fact, when you guys wouldn't sign that, many of you got kicked out of the caucus. Walk us through the current dynamic between the Freedom Caucus and the Republican leadership in the House.
Yeah, I think that was very surprising to me. Always been a Republican in our area, doing what we could, supporting what we thought were conservative candidates. And then to go into the Republican caucus, and most of the things I didn't have an issue with. Any of them, except for Rule 16, which said you can't campaign against others. And that just kind of blew my mind. What do you mean? I mean, if you vote how you campaign, if you're the same person in Columbia as you are in your district, what do you have to worry about? What do you have to hide? So that was very shocking in South Carolina to be the only state to do that. So I would never sign that. I would never go in someone's district and lie about them. But if I'm asked questions, I'm going to answer it, which I would expect the same to be about me. Accountability and transparency is so important. We're not there for ourselves or for our friends in chamber, and we need to remember that, and I will die by that.
Well, I know you and Representative White and so many of your colleagues in the Freedom Caucus aren't there. Unfortunately, I don't know that we can say the same for a lot of the establishment politicians you guys are fighting against. But let me ask you this. Looking past that Freedom Caucus establishment fight, obviously that's going to be a big deal on the campaign trail during the primary elections coming up in June. You guys have a bunch of folks poised to run. Is that correct?
Yeah, hope so.
Okay, and then obviously the establishment trying to take a few of you out. Have you been targeted?
No one, I suspect. I know people have been offered over $50,000 to run against me. The flyers have been sent out against me that were not truthful. I think they're searching, but I think competition is a good thing. And if there are good candidates out there, I'm going to support them. I'm going to donate money to them. I'll do whatever I can to change the fabric of South Carolina for good candidates, not just for the sake of throwing somebody's name on a ballot. But I encourage anyone to just take a look and see if now is the time for you to step up in some way and run. I think the people need to be represented by their elected official. I don't see that. And I would encourage others to realize all levels of government, how it affects you and your family, and get involved and make sure that your voice is being heard. I don't think
right
that's
now
happening.
It's the special interest voices more often than not.
Yeah, that's what it seems. Like you said, with the Scout deal, even in Anderson, we had a meeting recently. We were discussing the roads, and they said they can't get contractors or companies because they're busy with Scout. So it's affecting so many different facets of the area, and weaponization of economic development in our state. I think that is a huge problem.
Not to mention the fact that those individual taxpayers have got to pay the $1.3 billion that we're giving away to them. So it's a double hit. Let me ask you this question. As we look at some of the issues that are going to be before the legislature in this coming session, as we look at them within the context of this battle within the supermajority, I want to ask you about abortion. I remember we were actually on the way to a court hearing in Kingstree, South Carolina, when that decision dropped. The state Supreme Court upheld the 6-week ban that was passed last year by lawmakers. A lot of people thought the issue was over. Not over for you, is it?
No, I think life is important, and it begins at conception. I think it's in our state. I campaigned on that. I won on that. So that's something life is worth fighting for. I do think that we do have a lot of hearts and minds to change as a community and as a church. I think it's important that we do that. But every year, every day that I'm there, I'm going to fight for life. I'm not going to get tired of it. I think it's important.
And you've got several colleagues that are with you on a total ban.
Yes.
And that'll be introduced this year, or is it?
Well, it's been introduced. The bill is there. I don't know if anything will be brought up. That's the thing, is to get it to the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we have to just move the Overton window a little bit at a time. I think we just need to take a bite at the apple as much as we can every time.
So and I'm imagining the GOP leadership here, they thought this was done. They thought the issue's over, but there's a push from the right to extend the 6-week ban to conception. And then meanwhile, coming from the left, obviously there's a push to undo it. So as you see this session unfolding, where is abortion going to rate on the list of issues that we're going to be focused on?
Well, for me, it's always top. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and life begins at conception. And we can't, so many lies get in when you say that it doesn't. And I guess as a Christian republic in the Bible Belt, that shouldn't be hard to accomplish.
And yet, even getting the 6-week was pulling teeth, wasn't it?
It was very surprisingly hard, which I think when the pressure came, and that seems to be the case when the grassroots get up, get active, and the elected officials begin losing their seats, that motivates them.
So your election and the election of some of your colleagues, in a way, was partly responsible, perhaps, for that push.
I hope so. I hope that they'll look at that as an encouragement and not so much offended by it. It seems to be an offense to people that how could I, just a regular mama, to be elected? Because I'm not one of them. I wasn't the chosen one, but I'm a voice of the people.
Absolutely. And let me ask, speaking of that, let's talk about an issue that, I'm a father of a few kids. The porn in schools, the porn propaganda in schools, this indoctrination, the trans agenda, all this that they're pumping into the school libraries, into these books. Recently, the superintendent of education, Ellen Weaver, working with the school board, the state board, have advanced a proposal, a new, what's the word here I'm looking for?
The regulation.
Regulation, that's it. Would take some of this material out and set some clear standards, and also a process for local parents to contest these books in these schools. You've got some legislation related to this issue, don't you?
I do. Well, first, I want to commend and thank Superintendent Weaver of being the person and doing what she said she was going to fight for, which is standing in the gap for the kids and the parents. This is common sense legislation. She made the regulation, which is great. She's probably the first conservative superintendent we've had. I feel like we need the law to companion that. And so I have a bill that is in the hopper. Hopefully it'll come up to just solidify all of that, to define what pornography is and to prevent the porn pushers and keep them out of our schools.
Now, would this be a bill that would accompany, it would walk me through the structure of your legislation?
So it's defining pornography and the different systems that the books can come in, kind of although I didn't coordinate with Ellen, the bill I have is modeled after Texas and Florida when they passed. Then I started working on that this summer.
Florida's done some great stuff on education. Let me ask you about this. A lot of folks call these book bans.
Right.
Let me ask you a question. Do you consider what you're proposing and what Superintendent Ellen Weaver's proposing, do you consider those bans, book bans?
Well, I think it's important to consider the narrative, where it's coming from. And just to be clear, I have great friends who are school librarians, and not all their librarians are doing this. But a ban means that you cannot get the book. No one is banning books. You can go on Amazon, you can go to Barnes & Noble, wherever, and purchase these books. You're just not going to use the taxpayer dollars to buy age-inappropriate material for children. But you can use your own money and go buy it.
And have them in front of our kids without our consent.
Right.
The other part.
And so that goes back to even needing statewide legislation for this. Your local school boards, they could take care of this before the regulation goes into effect, before the law goes into effect, because at the state level, it's hard to get this stuff done. But that's why local elections are so important. Your school board could change this tomorrow if they wanted to. And in Anderson, it shouldn't be hard. I think you're going to receive outside, but nothing like the support you will receive from the community. And it's just not being done. The school boards are not listening to the parents. They're not implementing these rules.
Yeah, we've covered that Richland, Beaufort, a bunch of counties where there's legitimate outrage over some of these books, but the school board's doing nothing.
Well, in Anderson District 1, we have the previous president of South Carolina Association of School Libraries. And that seems to be District 1 seems to have a lot of issues with their libraries, more than the other districts in my area.
I think we've reported on one or two of those.
Yeah, I think you did.
Let me ask you this question. How important in this debate is school choice? If we can get to a system where you talked about competition earlier electorally, where are you on school choice and competition academically?
Well, yeah, even in our business, we'll tell our competitors make you work harder. It makes you do a better job. School choice is the same. We have amazing teachers, but of course, they're expected to do everything but teach now. And the pressure from your district offices, from the principal, it should be, the principal-teacher relationship that are making these decisions. The needs of every student is not being met. The taxpayers are paying the dollars, but the schools are failing. And so school choice is important, that the parents have the choice to decide what's best for their kids and to meet those needs. And if they're not being met, they need to have the option to put them wherever they need, because it's their dollars that are being spent and their kids aren't benefiting from it. It's a shame that most of the kids in our state can't read on grade level, 3rd, 5th grade level. So I think it's definitely failing, and we need to get very creative very quickly, because you can bring in Scout Motors that says they're going to have all these jobs, high-paying jobs, but if the residents can't read on a 5th grade level, those jobs are not going to come from the area. And that's where my focus would be with the main problem, and how do we fix that so that these kids can grow up, have critical thinking skills, and be able to decide on their own what they want to be and where they want to go. The government shouldn't be involved in that.
And you talked about the numbers were up to almost $18,000 per kid per year in the government-run system, and yet the outcomes, if you look at NAAB, the nation's report card, we're continuing to fall further behind the rest of the country. Let's stay in the schools for a minute. I want to ask you about, you mentioned earlier the Save Women's Sports movement, how difficult that was to get going, and that broader indoctrination. What can parents in South Carolina do to stand up against this? You mentioned the local angle earlier, but what can we as parents do to kind of, like you said, stand in the gap right now?
Well, I think, one, it's important to know that not all teachers, not all parents are bad. I think they're pitting us against each other, and that I think good, honest conversations are important. But the parents, get involved, get to know your school board member, take them out to coffee, ask for just 5-10 minutes of their time, have just a great relationship or a good conversation with them, and start the conversation that way, because that's how reform is made. And maybe they're not going to give you the answers that you want. And maybe you see that, hey, maybe I could run for school board. Maybe I could flip that seat. that's the way that we're going to make a difference. But you can't just go and vote on election day and expect that what you want to happen is going to happen. You're going to be represented, because your voice needs to constantly be there, because the lobby and the special interest groups, they're there. So they need to hear from you. And that's why I told people when I was door knocking, when I give my phone number out, I said, please call me, not just on election day, but throughout the process. I need to hear from you. And I meant
You've
it.
been incredibly accessible, and even to us, every time we've reached out for you, we've done a ton of stories, and you've been more than willing to share quotes and information. And the other thing I've noticed about you, I see you in meetings in Columbia where it's not necessarily a House committee, or it's not necessarily a issue that you're known for focusing on. But I remember we were at the big Senate panel that was looking at some of the vaccination issues. I remember you were there studying that issue. How important do you think it is to keep tabs on all of these? There's so many meetings in Columbia, there's so many of these panels, but you seem to be in a lot of these meetings keeping tabs on these issues. How important is it to you to keep tabs on all those different things?
Well, I think you have a short amount of time to be there and a lot to learn. So I try and go as much as I can, or stream and listen, so I can learn the process. I'm a systems person, I'm an auditor. So I like to know how things work and where the information and everything is coming from. So I think it's important. I like to be in the actual meeting, because I think you can get so much from the people that are there, that are listening, that, you just hear different conversations sitting there that you might not hear online.
Give me a prediction for this session. And I want to ask you two predictions. First, related to legislature. The second, related to the campaigns. Obviously, we've got both coming up. Will the South Carolina General Assembly once again rank as the most liberal Republican legislature in America this year? Or are we going to finally see conservative legislation come out of Columbia?
Well, being a freshman and learning, I think we're going to see the most conservative session we've had in a while.
Tell me why.
Well, the first bill to come up is the Protect Our Children bill, to keep our kids from being transitioned in the medical community.
Mm-hmm.
And that bill has been brought forth, I think, for 3 years now. But last summer, the Freedom Caucus FOIA'd MUSC asking for information, and found out that they had gender-affirming care clinic for kids, I think, as young as 2 years old, on the taxpayer dollar. And just with that FOIA, they shut the clinic down.
Wow.
And that brought a lot of attention to it. Legislators have been asked before to help with that issue, and they would deny that it was even happening. But since the Freedom Caucus were able to bring attention to that and have a success when we're not even in session to be effective, but then now that's the first agenda item in the House. On Tuesday, when we go back, that bill will be brought in the 3M committee.
But as we look at, and I think we can both agree, outcomes in South Carolina, we talked about the test scores versus the soaring price of government education, but our tax rate, one of the highest in the Southeast, our labor participation rate, one of the lowest, income levels, well below the national average. How do we turn these outcomes around, and how can this legislature, starting, like you said, on Tuesday, turn those outcomes around?
Well, one, get out of business. Government, what have they successfully ran? Except for in the ground, maybe, some things. Get them out of, government doesn't need to be in business picking winners and losers with the taxpayer dollars. See what we can return to the taxpayer. Put more money in the taxpayer's pocket. Stop trying to force the market. I think that's the big thing for me. I would love to go into these unelected the bureaucracies, and see the money that's being wasted and return it to the taxpayer. That's the best way to have free markets, to give some relief. When I was knocking doors, I mean, there are just some you just won't forget. Retired couple, very modest, hardworking, blue collar, finally retired. The husband is having to go back to work part-time so his wife can have her medications. You just don't forget that. Very honorable. They don't want to go to the government, nor should they have to. They worked all their life for what they have, and now they can't afford the life because of all of the wasteful spending in South Carolina. That's what, I mean, as a business, when we have something that's draining, you either plug the hole or cut it off. And that's why I'm saying in South Carolina, if we really wanted to help the people of South Carolina, we would go in, do forensic audits of these bureaucracies, cut off some of the regulations that are unnecessary.
Restructure some of them.
Yes, absolutely. Be serious, not just something to catch a headline and to put your name behind and make it look like you did something. I don't care if my name's on anything, but I'll work with whatever to get the right thing done for the people.
Let me ask you this. We're talking about what we expect in the session. Let's talk about now predicting the election. Obviously, June of this year, partisan primary elections with a supermajority of Republicans, the Republican primary. That's obviously where the fight is. We're going to find out who controls the levers of power in South Carolina based on who wins the Republican primary races. Where do you see those races going right now? Do you think the Freedom Caucus picks up seats, or do you think the establishment is successful in eroding that base?
No, I think we're going to pick up seats. I think there is the hunger for that. I think of awareness to people. I think once you see behind the curtain, it's hard to just go about your everyday life. So I look forward to seeing, you have a lot of commitments. I'm one to, I think in March, then we'll finally know where the candidates are, but I think we'll maintain and we'll grow. That is the goal, to grow.
In March, obviously, the filing deadline, that's where candidates have to file their paperwork to run, and then the primaries mid-June. So you're predicting pickups?
I do. I think we'll pick up at least 5 seats, but I would love to pick up 10. I know money is an issue. Being a legislator, it's not a high-paying job, but you're not there for the money.
Let me say this. As a parent of 7, soon to be 8 kids, and as a taxpayer of the state, I hope you pick up 20.
Oh, yeah, that would be amazing.
We need them.
Mm-hmm.
We need folks that, like you, are focused on the bottom line. Representative, I want to thank you for taking the time. Would you be willing to come in at some point during the session, maybe give us an update on how things are going?
Sure, would love to. Thanks for what you're doing for the state.
Well, thank you as well, and I appreciate you taking the time. Representative April Cromer, everybody.